Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're going to be talking about a demon horde bent on revenge. We're going to be looking at a cursed recluse as far as our NPCs, but we're going to be talking about the Fallout RPG with Sam Grant here on Rise of the GM. Well, guys, we are back again here, and as I said in the intro, we do have a guest. I'm going to point the correct direction this time. Sam Grant with us today. Sam, it's good to have you back. You've been with us before, right?
Yes, sir. Sentinels podcast.
Yeah. And now we're going to have your expertise on this Fallout thing, which is good because Adam and I know very little about it. So you can do that, but we can do
right there. Yeah.
But before we get to any Fallout RPG talk, we are, as always, going to do an encounter starter. But before I do that, how are you guys today?
Doing well.
Yeah. I always find myself jumping right into things and just powering through. People are probably like, I wish these guys would just tell us what's going on in their life a little bit.
It's nice to know you care.
Probably nobody's thinking that.
Yeah.
They're like, get to the content.
Yeah. How was his day?
Yeah. Well, I'll say, and I don't know if Sam will get this too, since we're in the same town, but kind of spread. But not only do I have trains here, but we also have an air show this weekend.
Yeah.
And today it's a beautiful day, and I like got to sit outside and read for a little bit, but you could see people practicing their maneuver. So if we get like buzzed by what sounds like a Top Gun or something, it's that. So yeah.
If a guy drives by in a loud El Camino, we can call this the Planes, Trains, and Automobiles podcast. That'd be great.
That's our other podcast.
That's the other one we got. Yeah. You know, noises from Adam's recording environment.
Yeah. It's like weird ASMR.
Well, let's jump into get started with our encounter starter, and this one today is about a vengeful horde, and I'm going to read this one, and then we'll talk about like what's good about it, what could be better about it, what we like about it, what we don't like about it. So, the vengeful horde. This is about a vengeful horde. Surprise, surprise! It's a supernatural force that takes the appearance of a host of demonic creatures, which is released from its ethereal prison. Right. So there's this ethereal prison with all these creatures in it. They get released, right? And when they do, they get released to bring vengeance upon a person or persons. So someone set this horde free. The horde will pursue its target relentlessly, destroying everything in its path. And the horde can't be killed by weapons or spells or anything that your PCs have. It can only be forced back into its ethereal prison through the use of a holy artifact. So while traveling, the PCs receive word that the last town that they were just in, that they just visited, has been destroyed. Somebody got away and told them, or somebody knows about it or scried it or whatever. They get this information that it's been destroyed. Survivors say that the town was destroyed by this legendary vengeful horde. And after some investigation, it becomes clear to the PCs that the horde has been sent after them in this case. And it seems like on the day after they visit a location, the horde will show up there and destroy that location, right? So the PCs, either they know of or they learn of or hear of the holy artifact and learn that it's being kept in a great temple in a nearby city. And we'll talk about that nearby city in just a second. And they have to travel there to that city to acquire this holy artifact. And the problem is that the city is using that holy artifact to protect them from the presence of some other enemy, right? And if the PCs take that, it'll put this city at risk of being attacked by its enemies. And so the city elders don't want to give it to the PCs. And so the PCs are going to have to convince somehow the elders to release this artifact, or they're going to have to steal it and figure out how they're going to go about that. And then they're going to have to travel to this nearby mountain that houses the horde prison, right? Remember this ethereal prison? And so the problem is the evil nature of that ethereal prison that's been there for a long time has attracted all manner of like evil creatures that live in that area. And they're going to attack the PCs as the party tries to get entry to the prison, right? So the prison itself, aside from these encounters that's going to have to be faced of whatever's around this ethereal prison, it contains a number of magical or mundane traps, which is good. Gives you a chance to kind of flex your trap, encounter stuff. These traps are designed to keep people out of the prison so that people don't get in there and let other things free. The PCs will have to overcome these obstacles and then deliver the artifact to the prison, get it wherever it's supposed to go. And then once they're there, they have to complete whatever this ritual is in order to return the horde to its confinement. And they have to do so. They have to do all this in less than a day, because otherwise the hordes are going to lay waste to that city that they just went to and got this holy relic from. So the plot, they mention in here, the plot works best when using an existing city in your campaign. So you think of a city that has already been in your story. Prison should be a few hours away from there on horseback, and then they're going to have to go through rough and difficult terrain. So it's not just going to be a quick trip. Not to mention they have to fight whatever these things are that have been attracted to this prison spot, and then get in and do the ritual, all that stuff. And then there's the question of who was it that released this horde on the PCs anyway, right? And you can use that to drive future adventures if you like, or different little encounter arcs here and there. Was it a foiled nemesis? Was it a rival party, a vengeful dragon, a spurn lover? You get to make that up. So this is a good encounter, and there's several parts to this that I like. I like, first of all, that you kind of hear of it happening and then realize you're the target. But secondly, that you use an existing city. If I were putting this into an encounter, first of all, I would try to find a time when they had just been traveling to a small city that doesn't matter, because that's the one they're going to leave and it's going to be totally destroyed. And they're just going to hear about it. This is like what's that about? But then I would make the next city be maybe the one, for some reason they have to get back to the city they all started in, because whenever PCs all start in a city, they love that city, and it's hard to not go protect it, even if there's bad things going on in that city. Then, that's where this relic is. And maybe that's why they go there next. It's like they get the knowledge through some way that you've dropped that there is this holy relic in the city that they started in, or in some city they care about, city their family lives in, whatever it is. They go get that. And then there's that, okay, if you don't hurry, that city is going to be destroyed by this demon horde. And this demon horde has already proved that it will destroy completely. I mean, you think, we all have locusts right now around us, some of us more than others, but you think about that horde of locusts that swarms in just on everything. That's what the demons do on everything, destroy it all. And so it gives you the chance, as they're riding through difficult terrain and fighting these obstacles of whatever it is that has been drawn to this, ethereal prison, and then getting in and figuring out how to do the whole ritual, not to mention the fact that there was time taken up as they convinced the elders or just planned the heist to get this thing out of the city. All that is going to put a timetable on it. And what I would do is, that timetable is kind of in the back of their mind, and you can kind of bring that up, as they're planning their heist or doing the persuasion, and then as they're fighting their first battle around that ethereal plane. And then when they get inside to do the ritual, I would actually, Adam talked about something he's borrowed from another game, that what do you call that, the little tracker?
A scene tracker, that's symbols.
Yep. When they get to doing that ritual, I would say, time is almost out, and you have, boom, this scene tracker. And then so they have to do this ritual, and don't forget, there was also all these mundane and magical traps to get through. So somewhere in the middle of that, maybe you could start the scene tracker. And so they're like, there's this real pressure.
For sure.
A lot of this just sounds like a fun encounter arc to me. I don't know. What do you guys think about this encounter arc that we read today?
Yeah. I think like you saying encounter arc, definitely. Like when I think through these, typically when I'm coming to Eureka, this book, like I'm thinking encounter, maybe it's a session, but this definitely seems like a longer term thing, unless your group just moves really fast. So that was a thing. I was thinking like this could be like a major arc of a campaign, and it is that unveiling of like, okay, somebody sent these things after us, and now that's your like villain, of the group kind of thing. But that urgency and time thing, I think, is the piece I was thinking about a lot of. It sounds like they're like a day behind them constantly. And that timekeeping, I think, is going to be super important with that of like, what does it look like? And does it actually become urgent, or is it just like, well, whatever we do, they're 24 hours behind us. So, we can just kind of delay.
I also like that no weapon or spell that they have will do
Right.
anything except for this relic. You know, that keeps
Yeah.
them from being like, we're all powerful. We'll just step back there and, you know,
Yeah.
instead it's like, oh, we've got to find this thing and do this other route.
How do you feel? How do you guys, both of you, feel about that? Like, have you come into that place as a player where it's like, hey, this is a thing, but it's untouchable? Because it almost feels more like an environmental thing at that point,
Mm.
where it's like, I can't battle it. But like, as a player, is that kind of confounding to you, or are you good with it?
I like it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm speaking as a GM and then putting myself into player position. But I do like, you know, you can get to a place where battles become so kind of mundane that you all know what you're going to do. You know, I'm the
Yeah.
one trick fly back and shoot. I'm the one trick go up and absorb damage. I'm the, you know, everybody kind of has their, this is what I do. And then to suddenly have to think, oh no, this has to be solved a different way. And then, you know, to have all like the magical and mundane traps. Now, when they go through those villains who've attracted around the thing,
Yeah.
that's when they can use their, you know, one
Yeah.
trick pony fight,
Sure.
you know, and they can go in and destroy things. But I like it when things kind of take a different twist.
Mm.
What about
What about you,
Sam?
Sam?
Yeah, you know, I think it's really for me as a player, I think it's humbling in a good way. You know, maybe again, like Matthew said, maybe I'm thinking more as a DM, but I think it's important to see things in the world that are larger than you, you know, or that
Yeah.
can't be solved by getting a high enough roll. You know,
Yeah.
I can't think of a place where I've been in that as a player. I've definitely been there as a DM. You know, you might be trying to had a player one time try to cross the ocean in a superhero in Sentinels
I remember this.
with ice, and it's like, you can try that, but you're gonna get tired. You know, you
Yeah.
can't outroll nature or gravity.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so I think it is important to have these moments so that players remember we're still trying to tell a good story. You know, we're not the rolling is an important part, but I think the story becomes more important at a certain part. But
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something. You said, you know, maybe I as a DM also, which I'd said, I do think that those of us who have done that GM role and then found ourselves as a player, we have this realization that it's not just about like the constant win. Sometimes the failing stuff is where the best story comes from. And sometimes when you roll and you don't make it, you know, and so it's the same thing when I come up against something and I have to think of a new way because my tried and true
yeah,
does nothing, you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
And so those of you out there who are maybe just players kind of watching this podcast thinking, oh, this is about GMs and that's interesting. Or those of you just starting your GMing, do take into account that idea of failure is where the best story happens. It's the same way in life. You know, you've heard all the time, if you write that is a story with no conflict is boring. It's only when there's conflict that tension begins to rise and you have this, you know, this place where you can have the climax of the story and then, you know, then the feel good. But without that, it's like, okay, so I win everything and everything's awesome and I'm the best and nothing hurts me.
Yeah.
Not that exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Stakes matter for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually going to, little throw ahead, we're going to talk in the future, near future, about like better player practices. We're going to kind of go into a little series about that soon. So that'll be
Nice.
cool to talk into some of that stuff. I really like this as like a threat to the places you've been.
Mm.
And I was even thinking about, you know, of when they're receiving, excuse me, when they're receiving the news kind of about this place, like if they're standing in the middle of a town, I like it. I like them getting it there. Like, you have just explained how the bustle of the town, the marketplaces are opening up, children are running in the streets, and then this person
the
stumbles
children.
into town. Oh, you know, and
Yeah.
that's my, you know, my go-to. But it's like they, you know, this person who you knew from another place stumbles in and is like, I finally found you. This is happening, you know,
Yeah.
and you're seeing all of this around you, like, oh no, like this is
And I
coming,
like that.
you know.
I like
so,
that. And that makes it even harder because if they have to go to another city to get this relic and then go to the prison to save that city, and then this, will they like feel like I've got to save both cities? I've got to like get there, get that, get to the prison,
Bring it back.
all,
You know.
all in a day. Yeah.
Yeah.
because as
some
soon as you
urgency there.
perform that ritual, it forces them back into the ethereal. So even if you're getting like 23 and a half hours and they finally get it,
Right.
they'll save both towns, right?
Yeah.
If they just left. So
Yeah.
that's cool. I like that.
I also, I think you could do a lot of cool stuff. Adam talked about descriptions and people running into town. I kind of pictured two things. One was, for some reason, I saw this a lot as like the Venom symbiote, just some sort of force moving around, slithering around, slowly enveloping places and just changing them, that's not really, anyway, that's more my imagination, but I think descriptions of distant environments could be really good. The players are traveling elsewhere between towns and they look up on a hill and behind them they see the city in smoke, or they see people running from it. I think that could be a good opportunity to really use travel time or travel to have even more of a purpose for storytelling, because we talk a lot about how hard it is to, what do we do with travel time, but
yeah, right.
Another thing I put down too is I feel like this pushes your PCs to take responsibility for their actions. I haven't ran a lot of games with, your murder hobos, or your people who don't care, but I think this is a good way to push you to do it. Well, I know, right? That just means I need to run more games, right? I just need to get out there. But I do think that this makes the world a little more real. What I do does matter. I'm not always going to save the day, and maybe I'll make a mistake that has an impact on people. And in this case, it's running to another town. You can't really avoid this because no matter where you go, you're just destroying more and more when you're trying to avoid this problem. So I think this has a lot of cool opportunities in it.
Yeah, a thing that like I would want to think through is as the GM running this is the contingencies of like, okay, one that I could see happen is you got I don't think everybody's going to be on board with sacrificing themselves to save. I don't know, maybe, it's like they're probably going to go for, we're going to get this, we're going to do this ritual. But even like, okay, what do you do if the group says we're going to go try to head this thing off and then just stay ahead of it, like kind of thing, and make it, will it adjust to them or does it go to every single point?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like, what do we, just having that in our brains, like, how is this going to affect, or maybe to get a little darker. Okay. We have enemies. What if we start going to their towns?
Yep.
And somebody weaponizes this horde, like kind of, and again, that's like this broader thing, but having contingencies of like, how is this going to actually react to the way they go if they don't go down the path that's kind of laid out here of this is, you go to point A and then point B and then you finish the job and then it's done kind of thing. So I think that's a good thing to be. I don't think we have to plan everything, and there is reaction and there's improv like we're going to talk about next week. But also maybe thinking through sometimes of if they don't do exactly what the plan is, how do you respond to that is a good thing too.
Right. And I think, like you said, putting them in a town and making something that they care about be in that town makes that a little less likely that they're like, who cares? I'm just going to start doing all this bad stuff. And it gives them a chance if they're in a town that's not maybe their hometown that's so important to the story or whatever. If they're in that town and they decide, well, we're just going to go try to face this, that's the chance for them to see our weapons and spells do nothing. It's just, it just comes right at it. So, And I like that, Sam, you were talking about like kind of gives them a reason to take responsibility. That even ties into like who did this. Maybe you can, if you have it in your game, if they like wronged somebody but left them alive, say a weak mage, who then went and found this and released it on them, found some ritual, whoever it was, somebody, they have to take responsibility for the fact, oh yeah, we left this guy just like laying in pain, almost dead. We said, who cares? He'll be fine. Or, we collapsed this house on him. We never went in to check to see if he was still alive. Whatever it was that they did, someplace where they left someone in not happy, departure. There you go. And then that brings up this, okay, what is it that we have to be responsible for as we go? So,
what does it mean to be a hero? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So very good. Good encounter from the Gnome Stew people. Again, that's from the book Eureka, 501 Encounter Starters. So again, if you haven't checked that out, do check that book out. It's very handy for getting ideas.
Very much.
Mhm.
But we're going to go on today. We're talking about something that Adam and I have admittedly told Sam before this podcast. We really know nothing about this, but we're interested, and he's
Okay.
on here to elucidate the idea, the RPG of Fallout. the
Yeah.
RPG. So I was telling Sam before we started, I haven't. I guess this was a video game. I'm old, so the video games I played were like Halo and well, way back Atari 2600, and then Xbox. And now I talk about Xbox like it's like the latest system. I have the regular Xbox or the 360 now, which I guess they stopped.
It was on the
making anything
360.
for. Was it?
Oh,
There you go.
nice.
Fallout 3.
So I didn't play it, but
New Vegas too.
didn't play it. And I was telling him I didn't even watch the show that just came out on Amazon Prime or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I meant to, when I saw this was on our upcoming schedule, I was going to try and binge those. I think they only have one season out, right?
Yeah, 9 episodes. I think it's 8 or 9 episodes.
So I was going to try and binge 9 episodes just to get an idea what it was about, but I didn't yet. Sam, Adam,
absolutely.
Sam, whoever wants to, Adam, why don't you kind of kick this off the
sure.
way
Yeah.
you always start things well, and Sam can tell us what's going on, and I'll just be here for comic relief.
Sounds great.
I thought it was cool. I didn't, like Matthew just said, I don't have a lot of, I think the way I explained it the other day was like, I know there's like a shelter and I know there's the dude that's like this, like giving the thumbs up kind of thing. And that's like basically what I know about Fallout, besides it being a video game. But I thought it was cool. Like I didn't have any idea even that there was a show coming out when we planned this to be.
Yeah,
So
kind of cool timing.
It's interesting timing for sure.
Yeah.
But Sam, you had kind of given an invite to play Fallout a while back ago.
Sure.
And it just didn't work out time-wise for me, but that had gotten me interested in it and really enjoyed talking Sentinels with you. And
absolutely.
Knew this was a specific one that you had run. So kind of just wanted to talk to you about that today. So I guess like the first thing before we get into like mechanics and just kind of what the game looks like what was the like interest in even going into the Fallout game? Like what brought you to the point where I'm like, I want to run this?
Yeah, absolutely. So for starters, we'll talk about the world in a little bit, but you don't have to know anything or have played any games to jump in. There's not a high entry barrier like, oh, you got to know this or do that, right? If you're ready for the post-apocalyptic world, you're ready to play. But how I got into it, I was a big fan of Fallout 3, which was the first 3D Fallout game. So anyway, made by the people Bethesda, who also made Skyrim, Oblivion.
Yeah.
So if you like that, Morrowind, of course. It's that and the post-apocalypse, right? There's a lot more to it than that, but those are the basics. So I got interested in that. And then, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago, I heard they were making an RPG, and I thought, well, core rulebook's pretty cheap. I'll pick it up. And it's really interesting. It's different. We'll talk about the system here in a little bit, but different system, but it does some different things that I like. That kind of, if you're used to 5e or if you're used to other systems, it's a way to kind of change things up for you and maybe appreciate different types of game mechanics or different things you can do in an RPG. I won't say that it reinvents the wheel, but definitely pushes you to think in some different ways that I like. So we can get into all that.
What is
the
just
system?
like a synopsis of what the story is you're birthed into? Because I don't even know.
Absolutely. Without any lore, and I'll just say it's more, there is a lot of, you could read a ton, but essentially nuclear war happens in the 50s and everyone goes into shelters, right? These are corporate shelters that corporations have made that people buy or go into. And you stay in the shelter and you try to keep human beings alive, right? So sometime later, usually it's around 200 years later, people start emerging and exploring what's called the wasteland, which is what's left of Earth, right? Different games take place in different places. Fallout 3 is the Washington, D.C. area. Fallout New Vegas is Vegas and kind of California. Fallout 4 is Boston. So it's kind of what happens if popular culture stops around the 1950s and then picks back up in the apocalypse, which is some interesting stuff. there are giant mutants, these things called ghouls, which are kind of zombies, but they're irradiated people. Some are feral, some are not, which becomes a point of contention, right? Racism and things like that. Giant mutated chameleons, Jackson's chameleons called Death Claws, and then a number of robots, right? So you have all these things roaming the wasteland.
Oh, wow.
You have people in different factions, right? There really is no big government anymore. It's a lot of small units of people banding together and kind of fighting for territory. You've got settlements, which are more established, where people have come together and agreed on usually democratic principles. But you also have raiders, people who just scavenge and go about and kill and loot and all that stuff. So it's a lot of different factors. Robots that were around in the 50s are still around, so there's just kind of a lot of different things kind of bumping up against each other.
Interesting.
Each and every vault, I will say, had its own principle or philosophy. So some were places where people got experimented on, others were utopias. So it's kind of a grab bag, these different vaults, on what people were like and what their lives kind of became. Some lived great lives and some had horrible things that happened there. So that's the basics, right? It's a little more, there is a story, but it's more of an idea and a feel. If you play the games, all the music is from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, right?
Yeah.
And you can run around and kill mutants to 40s big band tunes, or things like that. So it's got a tongue in cheek. It's got some dark humor, but it is just kind of this interesting, strange wasteland. And what happens to society when everything gets blown up, and how do you reform society or define that? And different people have different ideas about that, and that's where that fun conflict comes in. So,
And so I take it you are mostly human, or are
you
there
get to
other-
choose. If you are someone who lived in a vault, you are a human being, a vault dweller. But in the RPG, if you want, you can be a robot, you can be a mutant or a ghoul. They have what's called a super mutant, which think of just a giant hulking green guy, or a ghoul. The zombie-like people who are human, but they're also something else. So you kind of get that choice. But for the most part, they're mainly humans who are either underground or who manage to survive up on the surface somehow. So.
Okay. So what's the game look like? How does it go?
Yeah, absolutely. So the system is a 2D20 system, right? So
2D20.
2D20. And if you, and this was my first 2D20 RPG, but what you'll do for any of your checks is you take a skill. Let's say you've got an 8 in physical combat, and you have a modifier to that skill, let's say +4. That makes your target number 12. So as you're trying to physically move this barrier, right, you want to roll 2d20s and get a 12 or below. So unlike 5e, you're going for the lowest number possible. So 2d20s is what you're going to use for every single check, right? From any intelligence check or medicine or things like that to combat. So always use your 2d20s. And then when you go to do damage, you use a number of d6s.
So real quick, before you go on, you said
Yes.
2d20s, you roll 2.
You roll 2.
Those numbers added have to be below 12?
Each number. So as a DM, I would say, hey, you need 1 success. So one of your d20s has to be at 12 or below, right? Sometimes you get these challenges that are higher, right? You need 2 d20s or 3 or 4, which we'll get into. There's a way you can get more. Or 0 d20s, right? That's one that you could do normally, but if you roll for it, you could get rewarded, which we'll talk about in a moment. But always 2 d20s.
Okay.
And then another thing to note, damage-wise, everyone uses a d6 or a different amount of d6s. The hard thing, though, is that on your d6, a 3 and a 4 do nothing, which is tough. You can roll 1 damage, 2 damage, or damage with a special effect on your weapon. Maybe your weapon is piercing, and if you roll a 5 or a 6, you get to use piercing damage, and things like that. So the thing I like about this game a lot is it's not difficult just to be frustrating, but it is difficult because it's hard to survive out there, So you could roll 4d6s and come up with a couple threes and only do like 1 damage, or
Right.
it's you're not as much of a hero. Adam, I've heard you talk a lot about how in early D&D you are killing goblins in the mud, and just like scraping by. It's a lot of that, I'm about to die against this giant mutated mole rat, or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? It's just kind of very gritty, in an interesting way. So
I don't want to jump ahead too much, but
No, you're good.
is it more fatal on the
Yes.
continuum of RPGs? You feel
Much
like
more
that?
fatal. Whenever you, for instance, whenever you level up in things like 5e, it's, hey, roll a die. This is how much your hit die, and this is how much you increase. In Fallout, it's easy to remember because everyone's HP goes up 1 every level. The
Wow.
other thing is when you get attacked or attack, you roll a d20 to determine where you hit someone or you get hit, right? And I got to die with the different, parts of your body. But if you get damaged 5 or more damage at once, that limb becomes crippled, which is something from the video game. So if let's say you're running and your leg gets hit for 5 or more damage, well, you're dropping to that, dropping to your knees. Like your leg is either broken or hamstrung, and you're going to have to get it fixed.
Okay. So this is kind of like in that red market stuff.
It's
which
very
we've
red
not had an
markets.
episode on,
Yeah.
but same
But
sort of
listeners,
Very soon.
very soon,
Soon.
listeners. Red Markets is a great game that you'll love as well. But yeah, everything can get crippled and just do really terrible things. And additionally, any of your limbs that are crippled, once they're healed, you still get the DM can roll to see whether those wounds open back up, right? It's not just,
man.
I'm healed and I'm good. It's like, well, if you get damaged, then it could open back up and you're back where you started. So it's very unforgiving. And we'll talk about a little more of that here in a bit. But,
It's cool.
yeah. Anything else? I didn't want to ramble on or anything.
No, go right ahead, and we'll ask questions when we think of them.
Yeah.
Sounds great. So in addition, we use 2d20s for every roll. We use d6s. There's also something called the action points system, which I really think has been interesting. Action points are extra things you can do. You can think like maybe hero points in Pathfinder. As a party, you get a pool of action points. I think you can have up to 6.
Oh, that's bad news for anybody playing with Adam.
Yeah. You're going to use all the hero points.
He used all of them in the first moment.
Unlucky. No, but action points can do a lot of different things, right? Earlier, I talked about how sometimes there are 0 difficulty tests where you don't have to roll, but if you do, you can get a reward. The reward you get is an action point, right? And so in action points, you can take additional minor or major actions, right? You can, as a party, say, hey, Matthew, I really got to, hack into this computer and we're fighting these bad guys. Could I use a few action points? And he'll say, yeah, hopefully. And so you'll use those action points to do an additional action, major or minor. You can also use action points to buy more D20s to roll. So if you get to those difficult tests, you can say, hey, guys, I'm going to spend a couple action points and roll 3 D20s or 4 D20s to ensure that I get this, this check, things like that. You can also use action points to do more damage, right? Instead of using 2d6, I want to use 3 or 4. So it's something that you can use to do a little more mechanically. You can also do it, use it for some role-playing stuff as well. You can use it to ask the DM a question, one question that they have to answer about the scene or the situation. So I kind of like that aspect where you have a shared resource that you're all working to contribute to, right? You want to be doing well so that if anyone needs them, they can grab that bonus, right? Additionally, a GM also has their own action point pool. We've all been behind the screen where it's like, man, I got to beef this guy up or I want to do more damage. Well, in Fallout, if you're trying to be honorable, right, you restrict yourself to these action points. So when the players do something, maybe they mess up. I have to look at the mechanics specifically, but you get a certain amount of action points that you use to maybe you make your enemy do another move, or maybe you make a test more difficult, right? It's this interesting economy where
Yeah.
you really have to think about what you do and think, instead of just making all the choices as the DM, really think about what's most important for the story, right?
Hmm.
With this restriction of the action points. And some people really like that, some people might not. But
Yeah.
I find that it adds an interesting constraint
That's
to
cool.
both the players and the GM.
I like that idea. I don't, again, we didn't know the story stuff exactly, but even the like shared pool
Mm.
makes me feel like it's like that reliance on each other to survive.
Yeah.
Kind of, you have to figure out how to
Right.
work that to each other. And that seems like a really cool, just thematic thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. You could run a party that doesn't like each other, but man, they're not going to get far, so you really have to rely on each other. And I've got the core rule book in front of me, just double checking. Action points are gotten kind of the same way, right? If your NPC rolls really well, then they can get you GM action points or things like
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
anyhow, I think it creates some really interesting opportunities there.
Mhm.
We won't get into it, but there's also a luck function, right, as part of your
Mhm.
skills. And luck is cool because it can let players introduce things into role playing or things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. What is a kind of just character sheet like when I'm used to, I guess I've got a bunch of character sheets rattling around in my brain, but
Sure.
if we're thinking about the typical like attributes, skills, attack modifiers, that kind of stuff, like does it look similar to that, or what's the
Yeah, it's not a far cry from that. In fact, if you're used to red markets, it's probably pretty similar, right? In red
Okay.
markets, you've got a little guy. In Fallout, you also have one of those guys where you fill in bubbles for your injury, right? You don't really fill in bubbles. You just write, here's how many points of damage my left arm has taken, or my right arm, or my torso, right?
Okay.
But as far as skills go, it's interesting. In the video game and in the RPG, your skills are put into this category that is an acronym for the word special, right? Strength, perception, endurance, charisma, SPECI, intelligence, agility, and luck. So
Ah,
those are all the skills you can have. Generally, what's going to happen is your characters are going to be a little more specialized, right? You don't have a lot of room to kind of be a jack of all trades, but those are the kind of basic skills. And then each of those attributes in the special acronym can all go towards some sort of I keep saying the word skill, but in this case, really skills, right? You get to specialize in whether you want to be good at talking to others, or using laser guns, or surviving, or being good at medicine, or repairing robots, or things like that. So you get to pick those skills, and just like 5e, strength goes into athletics or things like that. Strength would go into melee weapons, or
okay, yeah.
things of that nature, unarmed combat, stuff like that. So
So special is your attributes. And then
special is your
skills.
attributes, and then you have skills. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice.
So,
That's cool.
and I could always send you a character sheet, but it's pretty similar, right?
Mhm.
That and inventory, things like that.
Yeah, right.
So it's a good standard. It wouldn't be hard to jump into it.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, cool.
yeah. Additional stuff. I mean, you also have, with combat, you rolled a hit. Instead of squares and distance and feet, what's different is you use what we call combat zones in the Fallout RPG. So that's usually something the GM has to come up with or draw out. But usually each room is a zone. Let's say we're in a 3-room house and I'm on the other end. Well, and you're on the other end of the house. I'm 2 rooms away, right? So I'm 3 zones away. So you have to have like a long range weapon to hit me. That's kind of more of a GM discretion thing. But what I like about it too is they differentiate between how high up things are, right? If I'm at the top of a ladder and someone's at the very bottom, well, those are technically 2 different zones, right? I have to look up to shoot you. So each weapon has functions best in a certain zone, right? Your close range is going to be best when I'm in the same zone as you, whereas My mini nuke launcher is going to be best at a far range, and so you can choose to shoot closer or farther than your weapon should be, but you're going to have to take a penalty, right? It'll be harder. You'll have to roll more successful D20s in order to achieve what you're trying to do. So I think the zone system is interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know of a lot of good illustrations to physically show that,
Mhm.
but it really is a little more theater of the mind. I usually play with battle mats and I'll draw them out.
Right.
Here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. But it could easily be a theater of the mind thing, right? You don't need that unless you want it. So.
Yeah. I know we've mentioned it several times, but that's kind of the red markets idea too. Like
Yeah.
I typically draw things on a map, but it's
Yeah.
technically in shambles, is the kind of zone idea. And even a game we recently played, me and
Mhm.
Sam played with me, Vason, that's a zone game too. So I'm seeing that
Okay.
more and more, and I'm wondering if that's like
A
something
trend.
that's kind of trending a little bit too.
Yeah, I do think it's pretty liberating. As a GM, you get to just kind of define what makes sense for the story, as we've been talking about. So
Yeah. Little further away from the exact measurement and people.
yeah,
crunching
yeah, got to take out my,
calculations.
my tape measure, and stuff like
Yeah.
that. We've
It's one of
talked
those
about
like
crits.
what's narratively it's like
No, no.
what's narratively appropriate right now, kind of thing.
Yeah. Do I really want to get out, the protractor, or the tape measure during the big bad like final speech or this emotional
Right.
moment? No.
Yeah.
So, I wrote down to talk about crits, but we kind of already talked about them. But again, you hit 5 or more damage in one place, and you're going to be hurting. I ran a small campaign with my brothers, and what was funny is, for some weird reason, they always, when I rolled for their damage, they would get hit in the left leg. So they were the league of the left leg. And when you go to find armor, all your armor, you get pieces, right? So,
Okay.
So everybody
I
puts
have-
it on their left leg.
yeah, I know. They went to find armor, and there wasn't any left leg armor because just didn't roll for it, right?
That's
but
hilarious.
They're forever trying to cover up that left leg. But it is also, I guess with armor and scarcity being a big part of the game, it's interesting too, because you can't just go to a place and get, full coverage usually, right? You usually have to buy things in pieces, arm, leg, torso, helmet, things like that. So
Yeah.
um,
Real quick,
Yeah,
Sam, there's
absolutely.
Evan's got a question in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
What is Fallout RPG reward experience for? Bopping
Okay.
mutants, completing missions? Question mark.
Yeah, so a little bit of both, right? Just like D&D, you can award experience with milestones. You can also do it with certain XP awarded for killing each thing, right? Just like in a video game, there are with each just like in D&D, each stat block has, here's how much XP you would get. Here's how much XP is required for this level. When I ran it, I did do the XP way, and it went fine, but if you're keeping track, and I only played with 2 people, right? But if you're doing a long form campaign with a bunch of people, you're probably going to want to do milestones. So I would say as a GM, you have the discretion. I think some of the missions or quests in the book have XP per the mission, Actually, I'm looking right here. At different levels, a major and a minor quest will give you a certain amount of XP. So if you wanted to do that too, you say, hey, you went and got this amulet for this guy, or a bottle of what they call Nuka-Cola for this guy. Well, you're going to get 20 XP at level 1, and level 2, that's 60, So it kind of scales if you want it to.
Okay. Nice.
Kind of GM's discretion, but great question. Absolutely.
Yeah. Kind of going back for a second, what's action economy look like? Like if we're playing 5e, we got an action and a bonus action and a reaction. Like, is that any different there?
Yeah, not too different. I believe Red Marcus is this way, but you get a major and a minor action.
Okay.
Now, because this game is a little more cruel, that action economy can be a little grittier, right? It is very, hey, you're going to use this action to pull out the weapon, and then you can use it, right? Or, you can use a minor action to pull out the stim pack or whatever medication you're going to take, but it's going to take another turn for you to actually take that thing. So, and of course, those things can be changed by the GM, but generally, it's about the same, right? Major and a minor action, and then you can purchase more actions with those action points, right? I want to take another major action or another minor action, and it can kind of help out in that way.
Instead of rolling an extra D20.
Yeah, instead of rolling an extra D20, right? You can also defend, commanded NPC. You can help your allies, right? Kind of inspire, ready in action, sprint, do a test, things like that. So that's kind of what it looks like a little bit.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So pretty dangerous environment.
Yeah. So
yeah,
there's a lot to it. It's not hard as a GM. Actually, it's a little, if you're more of a sadistic GM, this might be your kind of game. Right.
I need to look into this.
Yeah. I was thinking too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything, or almost everything, has a certain level of radiation,
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if players aren't careful, they can just stumble into a place and it's like, well, you are currently taking this much radiation damage, right?
Oh, wow.
And you're going to have to go get some medicine to become unirradiated. Otherwise, you're going to keep getting damaged, right? So you have to watch out for radiation. If you sleep on the ground or in the open, the GM gets to roll a thing to see whether you get to contract a disease, which is a lot of fun, right? For the GM,
This
not
does
the
sound
player.
like Matthew's.
It's kind of
like
Matthew's
this.
game, right? I don't have the disease table in front of me, but they're pretty fun and kind of brutal. Like I think one of them is your limb just kind of goes out, or
Oh, wow.
you can't think straight, you can't make certain checks or things like that. So you have to make sure as you travel, it kind of makes traveling important because you have to be thinking, where will I set up camp? What will I do? Because
Yeah.
I can't afford to come into this thing crippled, right? Or this mission I'm
Mhm.
going on.
Mhm.
Because you've got radiation, you've got diseases. I think one of the most fun parts is there are a number of buffs that you can use in the game, but almost all of those buffs are drugs. So there is a drug addiction table that you roll. They have to, every time they take a drug, if they choose to do so, they have to roll that and see whether they pass the check. And if they don't, they become addicted and will suffer some sort of withdrawal penalty. So you can really help yourself out with certain medicines or certain drugs, but there's also a chance you're going to get addicted and
Right.
your part of your character is going to become finding those things so that you don't constantly have this penalty.
Right.
So it can
And
get,
then if you can't find the medicine, you may take a different penalty
maybe. I
for
think
the addiction.
the addiction, it'll say something like, if you don't get, another one of these medications within a couple hours or 8 hours or a day, you start to suffer withdrawals, and each medication will have a different withdrawal.
Yeah.
And I think there's one called Mentats, which is a mint that helps you to think better or have better charisma. And the moment you have that, but then if you get addicted, you're forever, bad at things, right? Until you get your next fix, So that's kind of an exaggeration, but those withdrawals can be pretty nasty.
Nice.
So it's kind of interesting to have. There's really not a lot of mercy with the Wasteland and with Fallout, right? You can get these good things, but there's almost always a drawback or a complication.
You don't go into the future into a post-war thing to have mercy.
No, that's right, right? There's also scarcity, obviously. It's hard to find the ammo you need or just anything you need, really, right? You're scrounging everywhere. Yeah.
On that note, person in the chat asked again, I reckon firearms are a popular weapon. How granular is ammo tracked? Counting bullets, is there a more abstract way to track that? How's that go?
So I'll say it's very granular. There is a whole table for scavenging for ammo, right? Every shot you take is a shot of ammo, right? It's 1 to 1.
And it's counted.
It is counted.
Marked off.
And, like when I played with my brothers, they would use their guns, but for them, it was like, well, I can only use this for a couple more encounters. I'm going to have to start looking for another gun while we're out here, right? And hope that it has ammo, So it is very scarce. Now, if you wanted to not worry about ammunition, you can do that. It's really, the game is all about how nice or how cruel you want to be, just as all GMing is, right? So, rules as written, they are very much sticklers about how much ammunition you have and you can get. Because I do think that's part of the challenge too, right? If you're the Eldritch Blast guy and you always know you'll have an Eldritch Blast, it's kind of interesting when you're forced to go a different route, do different.
Yeah, for sure.
And the only other thing I would say is thirst and hunger are obviously a part of this as well. Right? Sleep as well. If you don't sleep in a good place, if you don't get a good meal, if you don't get something to drink, there's a certain amount of time that the GM has to keep track of, and you're going to start feeling that fatigue, or suffering those penalties. So it is very unforgiving if you want it to be. If you also just want to have fun, right? You can just take out all that stuff, but it's an interesting mix.
Yeah.
I've always wondered if there's a game that has like a really good mechanic for forcing people to think about eating and drinking, because I know it's in D&D, like you have rations, and there's fatigued and exhausted and all that stuff. I never play with any of that.
I don't blame you, right?
They only eat for story purposes in my games. They could go like months without eating and nobody would say a word.
I haven't eaten since the last annual feast. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you can definitely force that. Anyway.
So I got a couple questions, what's the thing, like if someone's looking for a game like this, like kind of the why this RPG specifically in your opinion?
Absolutely. I think the big draw for a lot of people is just they're fans of the series. That'll be the first thing. But if you're like, man, I know nothing about this, I think Fallout has a lot of interesting stories and kind of ideas for you. There's a whole section in the core rulebook of, hey, here are corporations that were here before the war. Here's what they're doing afterward, right? And all of these companies or pop culture things kind of take on a life of their own. I mentioned Nuka-Cola earlier. That's their Coca-Cola, right?
Yeah, right.
But it's, just kind of, they have built such an interesting little world of popular culture that you can't help but get a little interested. So, I think if you like that kind of thing, kind of tongue in cheek, a little bit of dark humor, as well as some grittiness, I think there's a lot to offer you here. I also think if you're looking for any sort of post-apocalyptic RPG, this is a good way to start, right? I know there are a lot more out there, but if you know nothing like me about post-apocalyptic RPGs, this could be kind of a good entry ramp into that sort of thing.
And it seems like anything that's post-apocalyptic really kind of focuses on that scarcity and survival as your two main things. It's like there's not much out here. The world has been kind of wiped clean of resources, and it's dangerous, and it's just about surviving. Which in a 5e campaign, you'll have danger. Often it's good versus evil, or like fulfilling a mission. But like the land is plentiful, and there's even magic stores and shops everywhere, and people go in. I want to buy this, and this, and it's like you can't do that in post-apocalyptic. It's scrounging. It's the same way with red markets,
take what you can get.
An apocalypse because of zombies instead of because of nuclear war, but same sort of thing. You got scarcity and survival are your two. And so I imagine people who kind of love that idea would really get into this.
And then absolutely. The other two things I'll say to recommend are, one thing I don't have and I haven't gotten a lot of detail into is, when this first came out, me and a lot of other people thought, it's around 2019, 2020, probably older. Anyway, when this first came out, a lot of people, the core rulebook came out and then nothing, and we're like, well, I guess the company Modiphius has moved on, right? But now there's just an explosion of Fallout content. So they have a campaign.
They probably knew that Amazon series was coming. They're like, let's pump it.
They're probably not wrong. But they also have, there's a whole source book on, hey, if you want your players if they're interested in building a settlement, here's a whole book about it,
nice.
Where you can stay and build up a settlement and negotiate what those settlement politics are like. There's also a book on just wandering, here's what you do on that. And you don't have to have those things, right? But if you're interested in going a little deeper, that's out there too.
Cool.
The last thing, go ahead.
I was just saying, it seems like a really, really great system to do the sandbox thing. And I know like people can do that with any RPG, but like you have the setting, you have your people, and just to be able to literally go play, wander around,
Yeah,
come across things, and survive. And it seems like it would be a really good just system for that.
absolutely. And to that point, I will say the thing last week you guys talked about, sorry, last week or the week before, involving your players in the process. Session 0, you have to sit down and say, this settlement you guys are starting in, what's it like? You know, what was the challenge it faced in its first year? Who are the people there, right? And so they become a really large part in building that. And the book also encourages, hey, you come across this doctor character, what's their name? What do they like? Right? You tell the players to do that, and you kind of follow along with what they want.
That's
so
cool.
it's kind of nice. It encourages that sort of
Yeah.
collaborative nature.
That's sweet.
The only other thing I would say, just to recommend, is we've talked on this podcast in the past about, hey, what books should you read to inspire you for fantasy or things like that. If you're interested in post-apocalyptic stuff, I would recommend reading The Stand by Stephen King or The Road by Cormac McCarthy. That'll really get those ideas flowing and get you kind of in that scarcity mindset.
Nice. Awesome.
I remember reading The Stand as a young child and just thinking, man, this book is so thick.
It's so
It is
long.
The
thick.
thickest book I've ever read. And then,
Now look at you.
Stephen King. Now, look at me. Now I read 700-page books in 2 days.
It's nothing, you know?
That's awesome. Cool. Thanks,
Well,
Sam.
thanks for bringing this idea of the Fallout RPG, especially because I do think with that Amazon series, don't mean to keep mentioning that, but I think it will kind of raise awareness of that, and people who enjoy that will be like, hey, I'd like to try this. And they may not have known there was a game out there like that. So any of you watching, if you're watching that show, that series, and you're like, hey guys, let's do a little bit of this in our gaming sessions for a few weeks. There you go. Sam Grant has brought you Sam Grant brought you.
Yeah.
He's not the makers. Sam Grant
You're welcome.
has brought you Fallout RPG.
It's a lot of fun, though. It's a lot of fun.
Cool.
Cool. Well, let's go to our NPC.
Yes.
See what NPC we have for this week. We're gonna let Adam do that this week. So, Adam, who do we have?
This is Janora of the Glade.
Janora
of the Glade, the cursed recluse. Her quote is, "My pride costs me more than my beauty. It costs me my freedom as well. Now I serve a will greater than my own, and my soul has discovered peace through that service." So Janora is dressed in the ragged remains of what was once a royal gown. Her skin is covered with sores from which small vines and plants are budding. Janora will not look directly at anyone, but covers her face with her hands so as to hide her disfigurement. She is timid and shy. She's ashamed of herself, but she's found solace in her role as the caretaker of the forest. Janora is motivated by the fact that she lives to nurture the plants and trees of the forest as she has been commanded to do so. And here's her background. Janora was once a princess, spoiled and cruel. When she heard of a beautiful golden sapling tree in a glade near her palace, she demanded that it be cut down and brought to her. Her servants refused for fear of destroying the sapling, being something that would anger the spirits of the forest. So Janora forced them to take her to the glade, where she chopped down the sapling herself with a hatchet. The small plants, or the sapling, began to bleed, and the blood seeped into Janora. She began to sprout small plants from her flesh and was cursed to be the caretaker of the forest for the rest of her life. That's Janora of the Glade, princess turned caretaker. Yeah.
I think what I like about this one is obviously you're looking for an NPC, right? So people are in the woods, they're going to come across somebody and you're like, okay, this is the NPC I'm going to drop in there. What I like about this one is you don't have to necessarily tell her whole story, but it gives you a way to play somebody who really seems to care for the forest, but has this strange thing going on. And at the same time, probably there's like this anger, maybe even like a retribution to anybody who seems spoiled. And it's all coming from her past because that was her, right? She was the one that I will have whatever I want. Take me out there. I'll get it, you know, and then this happened. And now she's taking care of the force and has found a peace there. But like, that's going to influence the way she acts toward your party because you always have somebody in the party who's like, is there any loot here? What happens if I chop that down? I want to take something. And so like she can like really kind of play into a role, whether she does anything to your party or not, just giving her a personality and a motive for the way you play her, because you're always finding yourself in the woods in some places. And if you have this person, it just makes it interesting. It could be somebody people remember really well, with these swords with little plants growing out of them. Seems very humble, but a flash of anger every time there's somebody who's greedy, or something. So I like that.
Yeah, for
Don't
sure.
know where I would use her exactly. It would depend on if I needed somebody in the woods taking care of plants that would be maybe wise at this point, I would say, about some things. So
Yeah. Sam, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wrote as we were talking about this. She seems like a cautionary tale for players.
Yep.
I like usually when we get like a keeper of the forest. They're usually this very peaceful or really forest loving people. They get angry because you're tearing down the forest. And I like Jinora because there's more to it than that. It's more than that stock character of the tree hugger. I think it adds a little more depth. And I also could see you maybe you get a situation where players have to go get something for the forest for another quest, and they run into her, and she's not the kind of forest keeper that you're used to, and so I think you could do a lot of interesting stuff with that.
For sure. Yeah, I do like that too. I was thinking about, anytime like a nature related character that you have can be that connection. That's something to connect with, or is like, I don't know. It's interesting to even flesh out the world more. So they're passing through a specific kind of forest, and you want to make it have some interest to it. They can come across this person. I think in this NPC book, in the Masks book, she's technically a neutral NPC. She's not necessarily an ally. She's not necessarily an enemy. But someone who you could come across, and like you said, the cautionary tale or the wisdom kind of bringing in there. I like.
No, you go ahead.
I like the idea of even again, we're always going. I'm always going into the what's the story hook and like where do we take this kind of thing. But what if it wasn't just her, but it was like her and her brother, and they both were spoiled and cruel. I don't know why it needs to be. Maybe it's her sister, twin sister. A sibling. They were both spoiled and cruel, and they both did this together. And it's even a tale of, I did this, and I accepted the forest's punishment to guard this place forever. But my sibling went the other direction. Kind of like what makes a hero versus a villain. It's the way they react to the hardship. It's like my sibling took it the other way and is now a wreaker of havoc throughout the world, kind of thing. And it's even like an opening to a villain that can come into this place. I don't know. For some reason that came to my mind of like, I think you could pair this person with somebody else who it's like just different stories that have happened through this.
Yeah. Maybe it's having played Vaesen, I don't know, but I do think, I also thought you could kind of take this in an interesting, horror aspect, you reach a town or a small village near a forest and people are telling you there's this woman in the woods or there's a creature in the woods with, bloody sores with vines and things like that. And, they think she's this monster, and then you meet her and you're like, oh, well, maybe not, but I think that could be an interesting mission for your PCs or a quest where they're sent to kill her. And they find out that there's more to her than just that.
Yeah. She's not actually the monster. So yeah, that's cool. Something I don't like with this character, and it's not about the character, but it's something I personally would not want to do is for it to turn into a quest to free her from her curse.
Yeah, no.
Like I like the idea of this is like her lot. Like it's not a Beauty and the Beast. The Beast needs to find true love, and then he's going to turn back into the prince. Like it's because I think that comes specifically from the way it's written to me. She's like, I have found solace. I have found my peace through the guard. Like she is. It seems like she's dealt with it.
Yeah,
and this is what she's doing. And I wouldn't want it to be like noble adventurers, if you can only go get the
Yeah.
MacGuffin from the temple
Yeah.
across the way, then like
I'll be
I
free.
just would want to keep her kind of in the position she's in. I think.
Yeah. Hey, I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier with, some things can't be solved and shouldn't,
Yeah.
And maybe
Yeah.
you can use it as a precursor to something one of your PCs have that they will not get rid of. some hindrance, some curse,
Yeah.
something that they have gotten that they haven't figured out how to get rid of it yet.
Right.
And now here's this person who's like talking about, I found peace in this, and I've actually begun to find meaning. And maybe she can even like hint at that to this character, whether they want to accept that now or not.
Yeah.
Right. I like that. That's
Cool. Good NPC. Let's jump to the haversack. Haversack full of questions. We have questions coming in all the time. Sorry if we don't get to them all today, but we're going to get to some of them today.
We're
And
do our
Adam's going to lead
best.
us through.
Yeah. So we're gonna start. Evan's been in the chat, but he's got a handful of questions here to start. And the first one being, how do you keep track of your NPCs?
Oh boy! Now that's that's something I've tried
keep
several
track?
different
No.
ways.
I'm
and
stumped.
I haven't ever settled on like one method. That's probably because of my lack of organization of mine. But there's been times where I think I mentioned it before as an iPad app called Game Master, and they have a section in there where you can keep track of characters, and it'll like have a global, keep track of, and then like per encounter, like it'll have, places you can keep track of, which is nice. And I really had the best of intentions of using that. And I did for a while, but then I didn't, for a while after that. My typical way is I have about 1,000 little notebooks and scraps of napkins and papers laying around that I have written stuff on.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, I know I had this character written down somewhere. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like digging through stuff, looking for stuff, which is a horrible way to do it. And the way that I probably use the most is I count on my players. I'm like, who here remembers a person that was an old lady with sores and vines growing out of them from like 4 sessions ago? What was her name? Josh?
Yeah.
Or Adam?
The
Josh or
note-taker.
Adam are like my go-to there.
No.
Yeah. We're jumping back into Jade Masks tonight, and that's gonna be that's
gonna
gonna be
be
almost
your,
the whole time.
you
Like,
know.
what's that guy's name again?
For any ascending GMs, definitely love on and thank your note-taking player.
Yeah,
Because
for
they
sure.
are such an asset.
Oh, yeah. If you're that GM who is a note-taker, oh, man, you've got it made in the shade, but that's not me. So I highly prize my note-takers. I should take my note-takers out for coffee every once in a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah. Get them a new notebook,
Sam, do you have anything particular you do?
Not particularly. I do one thing I try to do in all of my recently in my GMing is I'll make a packet, of everything I'm doing in that session. Nothing crazy, but I will put a list of the NPCs, and if I'm running something that's pre-made, then I'll put the pages that they're on. If I'm not, I'll put little descriptions, but I'll have them. I read a book recently, it was nonfiction, but it did a weird thing where they had a cast of characters like a play in the beginning. And that was so helpful to me. And I think that could be something really good that just put that at the front of your notes. So, flip back there and just read that short description. Or like Matthew's talked about, the short accent, the thing that, anyway, I keep a little bit of notes, but not as much as I should.
Yeah.
Which, if you've ever read a long series that there's a lot of time between writings, they'll have those little glossaries with that sort of stuff with
Right.
the front cast like that. That really does help. And you're like,
Yeah.
wait, who was Tylan again?
Yeah.
Tylan, I know. And you go look, oh yeah, that was that dude.
Yeah.
That is really cool. Yeah, I think I talked about this at some other point, but I've got like an ongoing, growing track of the game on one Google Doc, and then I have another spot, which right now for me it's like within D&D Beyond, but if it wasn't D&D, I'd probably be keeping it in another Google Doc of like this is this, or I'd keep it at the top of the original one, but it's like this is what's happening tonight in the session, hopefully. And then when whatever gets played through, I put it down at the bottom so that we could track through. But I have just like an NPCs kind of list also in that. So it's not like super, it's kind of, I don't know that it's much different in a lot of ways from like Matthew's 500 notebooks, because instead I have a 50-page Google Doc of all the stuff that we've done. And if
You
I
can
fail
control
to,
F.
Yeah, that's right. You can seek it. So, but if I fail to like put it in the list, then I have to go digging for it. So that's kind of a situation. But
So,
yeah.
I just had an idea. I just had an idea right now. I don't know if I'll ever do it, but so I just watched. I know this is super old, but you remember M. Night Shyamalan wrote Unbreakable, and then he wrote two more, Split and Glass. I've never watched Split and Glass, and it was on Netflix. It's going away like tomorrow, and so I knew I always wanted to watch it.
Watch it tonight, guys.
I watched it last night, and in there, it's about a guy who has 23 personalities, and actually a 24th comes out. But like in there, at one point, so not to give it all away because this is in the very beginning, but
We're gonna have to do a spoiler tag. On
Yeah.
this.
Spoiler. If you haven't watched
Spoilers.
Split, turn off your volume
forward.
till you see me stop talking. But anyway, he basically takes abducts these three girls, and then it's about them getting out. And at one point in there, a girl is in a room trying to find a way out, and she sees a computer, and it has a whole bunch of files with names on them, and she clicks on each one, and it's like a diary, a video diary, but like each one shows like a different character and the way they talk. And this guy is great at like really bringing a characterization to each of his personalities. And I just got to thinking, Sam was saying, if they have a dialect or they have a thing they always say, we all have cameras now because we do Zoom all the time, right? You're whatever you do Zoom on. Just make a little folder of yourself recording, and so this is, Karnak, and he comes in and he does this, and this is the way he talks. And then you come to the next one. It's like, my name is whatever it is. And then like, you got the old man who sits by the sea and talks. And so you do each of these. And when you can go back and click on it and be like, oh yeah, that's exactly that character. And that way you do it right. And you see if every one of your characters actually has the same accent. Cause you're like, it's the same as him. Oh, that's the same as her. Oh, dang it.
Yeah. Only three voices.
That's me.
To do a little better.
Yeah.
But I watched that, and I thought that's really a cool way if you can discipline yourself to do it.
Right.
Just, after your session, whatever NPCs you had, just sit down when everybody else closes off Zoom, record 3 little snippets of your 3 characters and what they talk like, and then put them in a folder, with the name. And so then you can Control F to find them, but you can also remember how they acted. So
Right.
that was kind of cool. And if you haven't watched Split, don't do it with your kids. It's not for kids. But it was a good watch. Now, I haven't watched Glass yet, so I'll let you know if I come up with any RPG ideas from
There you
Glass.
go.
Nice. Cool. Evan goes on to ask, what do you do with planned encounters or other things you've had to cut from an adventure? So you got stuff planned, you run out of time, you got to pull something, or maybe the group goes another way. What do you do with those things?
I feel like I always jump in first, but I'm going to.
All right.
Do it.
Because that's what I do. I think we've mentioned in the past, and a lot of GMs have talked about this idea that, something that's not used today or they went a different direction, don't throw that away. That's great to just throw down in another place. You might have to tweak it a bit, if it was very, space dependent.
Right.
But there are times where I have something and they don't get to it, and I'm just like, you know what? It wasn't that great anyway. I'm just going to let that piece of paper slide into my oblivion pile and never be seen again. But if it's good, if I really thought, man, this is useful, it gets repurposed, and it can get like totally reskinned. So say it was like a bunch of kobolds you were going to be fighting. They go away from kobolds. They level up 7 times before you actually get to this. Now, instead of kobolds, it's dragonkin, or it's like, it could be something completely different, hostile elves, or I don't know. That's a bad example. Elves are not usually your
Evil elves.
antagonist. Yeah. But anyway, a lot of that's what happens for me. But it does kind of go through a sift of, was this really that great anyway? If it wasn't, it's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just briefly, I think similar things, right? I had a good writing advice is, professors have told me, keep any and all writing you do, if at all possible, even stuff you don't use, because you will find a use for it later. And I think any planned session that the players don't go to, becomes a one shot that you can use anywhere, right? Keep a library of little one shots, but definitely don't scrap it. Hold on to it because, like you said, you might reskin it or use it another time. But you're still putting in work, and that work will be valuable someday. It just might not be today.
Yes, that's good advice.
I agree completely with all of that. Another question. How do you get feedback from your players? What kind of player feedback would you find the most valuable?
I'm going to start again, but I'm going to start by throwing it to Adam because I think Adam does this way better than me. Yeah, see the twist there?
That's
I
a
don't
Shyamalan right there.
I don't do real great at getting feedback. I'm like, I've got a plan. You guys are gonna love this. And I just plow ahead. But Adam has done this really good thing that I'm gonna let him talk about, the roses and thorns. So Adam.
Oh well, well, that specifically, I'm gonna just toss out right there. I stole from the question asker. So the roses and thorns idea, but I do kind of pulling away from that for a second. Like I think it's worth giving some time at the end of each session. I don't think you have to necessarily do a formalized thing. And sometimes it's like, hey, everybody's got to go. I got to get out of here, and you can't take that time. But even to be able to just like have that pack up time, it's not immediately everybody jetting out of the room, just to like talk and maybe ask some like pointed questions or like how'd you feel about that? Or what are you thinking for the next session? Are you worried, and just kind of letting people speak into that, I think is the best part of just like leave space open. Again, like I ripped roses and thorns from Evan, and I think there's other ways even that people use those terms, but asking the players, that can be an end of session or like between sessions kind of thing. Hey, what was the thing you enjoyed about this session the most? What was the thing that maybe you'd like to change or was like hard or just didn't set right? Like to ask those kind of questions. Really, that's the advice I would give is actually ask the question.
Yeah. And what's good about that? So as Adam talked, I realized I do a little bit of that in that I'll talk with Adam sometimes just about the game in general. And I don't say a lot because I'm the DM, but he will, talk about things and I'll kind of see, oh, these are the things that made an impact for him. Or I'll talk to Chris or I'll talk to Brandon or Josh. But what I don't get from that, because people will always tell you about like, what was interesting, but they won't tell you, man, this kind of sucked.
Yeah.
This was no good. That was boring. I was like falling off. They won't just kind of bring that up in conversation. So I think asking, what was not good is probably a very important thing too.
Yeah. That's a hard thing. I'm kind of tangenting, but it's a very hard thing, I think, with that because maybe people aren't thinking this, but sometimes with like critique, it's like, well, I don't want to be that player who's like always like, well, actually, or like, hey, I didn't get my way, so I'm angry, and I think sometimes we come at it with that too, where it's like, well, I don't want to be the like person dogging the GM, so I'm just not going to say anything about how every session I get sent to an irresistible dance, kind of thing. I think what you said there, Matthew, like of maybe we need to angle sometimes even for like, hey, like, is there something you feel like could be better or even like noticing, I think that's a GM, we talked about the facilitation part way back when of like, even in the facilitation, we're paying attention a little bit to how people are. Like there is like what's the demeanor around the table and, oh man, like this girl over here is like looking pretty mad for some reason. I think something happened. Maybe we need to like talk afterwards or take a break for a minute and like, hey, like, is everything cool? Or this guy over here, is just like checked out. Like, hey, like what's going on? Like to follow up on those things even I think is important.
And as a GM asking these questions, get good at reading between the lines. Like I said, sometimes people don't tell you why they don't like it, but then they'll like overemphasize what they wish they had. So they'll be like, oh man, I love it when there's like a lot of fighting and action. And if you're paying attention, you might realize, oh man, I talked for like 3/4 of our session just about a lore drop. And I was just like explaining way too much. And he's saying, I would rather fight and do more. And so
yeah,
you got to
for
be able
sure.
to read between those lines.
Yeah. The second piece of this, and Sam, if you got more to add, please do. But
I'll wait, but I will have something here in a minute.
hit that second piece of like what kind of player feedback do you find more valuable? Just to like kind of reiterate that. Like, I definitely think there's a tone that people can come with, about certain things. And is it like, are you criticizing me, or are we like critiquing the play, and like, how do we, kind of work with that? So I definitely think the tone that people bring is important too.
Yeah. And just briefly, I think just telling your players and encouraging them that they can give you feedback is important. You might get people who are new to RPGs and they'll be like, "Oh, you can do that," like. I can ask for different things, maybe not go crazy with it, but I do think you should encourage players to start that dialogue, because you might find that they have a lot to say, but they might be afraid to, or they don't know that they can.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about identifying the primary type of fun that people have, right? And
that's the next question.
Well, there you go. Where I'm going to kind of hit this and that last one at the same time. I think we can sometimes do that. Say what's the thing that's most fun for you in getting together on Thursday nights? Is it rolling dice? Is it touching things? Is it story? Is it narrative? Is it hanging out with guys? But then to say, hey, I really want to know, like, tonight's session, what was the most fun for you in that? Is anything really fun? What if something stuck out to you? What was it? And so when I'm looking at like what's the kind of feedback I'm looking for, I want to know what was fun, because really, and I've said this before, for me, running an RPG is not it's not a matter of like sticking to some plan and making sure XP levels level people up and I'm getting through. For me, it's I want our group to have fun. I want people to walk away and be like, man, that was fun and memorable. And so the kind of feedback that I'm looking for that's most important to me is, was it fun?
Yeah.
Was it memorable?
Yeah. Yep. For sure. Kind of turning that, identifying the player's primary type of fun, is a question Evan has. I am a proponent of grab that 8 types of fun article, have your people read it and tell you what what they are.
Yeah. Say, like, tell me which one of these you are.
Yeah. I do find, and maybe this is a type of fun, I don't know, but me and Matthew, I think some of the original convos I feel like about gaming and even like gaming theory and philosophy and stuff was like, I remember driving around, we were doing something and we're talking about people we've played with and trying to like kind of gauge, like, I think like the tactile stuff is like really this player's thing. And also definitely like the storytelling aspect is, that played out in this way, and having those things, I think you can do some like, just reflection on like, okay, what actually seems like they're driving people. But I would say at the root, like, I just wanted to like straight up ask like, hey, here's types of fun. How do you relate to this? Because I want to be a better GM and like engage you in these ways.
And it can be beneficial to not like every session, but occasionally go back and say, those 8 types of fun, first of all, don't ask for just one. Don't say, what's your favorite? Say, what are a couple of these that stand out to you? That gives you a clue. But then occasionally, after a major gaming time, say, looking at those 8 types of fun, does that still feel like the things for you? Because sometimes people don't even realize, man, I really like, this part. They think, I love these 3 parts. And then as they play and you ask them again and they reflect more, they're like, hey, I never really thought I was much of a tactile person, but I really do find it much more interesting when we have minis instead of on the computer and when we are rolling real dice. And so I think maybe I am more tactile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Sam, you got any thoughts on that one?
Honestly, I haven't used 8 types of fun as much, but I am interested in getting more into that.
Yeah.
Highly worth it.
Yep. And if anyone out there is listening and you're like, what are you talking about? We have a episode 8, actually. 8 types of fun.
Was that intentional?
Yes.
That was Adam's planning. I plan nothing. Like I said, I just fly by the seat of my pants.
That's your type of fun.
That's I'm the improv guy.
Yeah.
Let's do one more question here to wrap up. So going back here, let's talk about a new player joining. For a new player joining a campaign that's already in progress, what would you recommend a GM do to make that player's transition to the game successful?
Since I like to start things, here we go. I think for me, if I were starting a game that was already in progress, it really matters to me that I get to write a backstory to introduce how I come in. Like I get to be part of that, and then that they really kind of make a point of how I come into the group and give a bit of time for those dynamics. It's hard for me in the games that I've kind of joined afterwards if they're like, okay, what character are you going to be? And I'm like, this kind of character. And they're like, all right, you guys meet a monk in the bar. And it's like, so he tells them who I am and like where we meet. And then everybody just goes off on an adventure. It's like, okay, why do I care about any of this? And why do I care about them? And they don't know how I fight. There's just like so much that's like wrong. But like, if I can come in as like having a purpose that somehow then makes me care about what they're doing, that matters. So for me, again, as a lot of me is very story based, and there needs to be that recognition. And without it, I just start kind of going crazy trying to make things happen so that people begin to react to me. So, that would be one of the biggest things for me.
I think just kind of tailing off of that, the best way to do that is just to make sure your player doesn't feel like an afterthought. Sometimes literally, I didn't think you'd want to play, but here you are. So let's throw you in there, but don't make their character feel like that. I've been in games where so-and-so just appears and you're like, well, I guess they're doing this now. Right. And they seem more like, a one-time character in a sitcom than like a meaningful part of your group,
So a glorified NPC almost.
A glorified NPC. Right, so I would say if you're doing that as a GM, make sure you find a good way to where the player doesn't feel shoehorned or like they're the extra, right? Find a way to integrate them that in a meaningful way, because there's nothing worse than feeling like, oh, well, I guess, they just kind of threw me in here. Then no one really cares that I'm here, Hopefully your players aren't like that. I'm sure they won't be, but find a way that it makes sense for the player characters to react in a more important and meaningful way.
And so to kind of touch on both of those, the way you practically do that, I think you have to sit down with that person outside of game time before they come in and say, all right, first of all, let's get the mechanics of your character down in case you don't know how this whole thing goes. Here's who the other people are. Now, how do you see yourself fitting into that? Now, when we're coming together, how do you think would be a good way to do that? Again, that co-creation part, give them a chance to contribute to that. Again, this keeps them from feeling like an afterthought. They get to kind of dictate and narrate the way they come in. As a GM, that's going to take some time, because usually you're used to, okay, 3 hours before the session, I get all my notes together and I'm rushing right up until the last minute and then we go, But this requires like earlier in the week, saying, hey, can I get together with you over a coffee, or can I get together with you online? I just want to talk through who you are and how you are in this world. And so they're going to be like, oh, I don't even know, and say, well, here's kind of what's going on in the world. You have all the information as far as world and what's going on, but you want them to bring the information of here's who I am and here's how I think I would kind of come into all this. And then when you get to the game night, that's going to be easier to do because they have a clue. They have a clue. Right. This is my cue of when I make my entrance and how I make my entrance, instead of just kind of sitting there waiting for him to like say my name or, oh, I'm just sitting in the bar. Hi guys. How are you?
Yeah. So, yeah, I get that. It's interesting because it's not like, so tonight we're jumping back into our campaign, our D&D campaign, but also Taylor, who has asked questions on this and was in the chat a couple of times, is gonna like make a guest appearance tonight. It's just for tonight. It's not like entering a campaign, but I'm thinking through some of these things, agreeing totally with what these guys are, what Sam and Matthew are saying, in that of, it's not just an afterthought. It's not just like you're like a random side person, even though it's a one-time, session. So I'm like thinking through this stuff in real time too, and trying to give enough backstory and like understanding of what's going on and how they connect, but also playing with time and when are we all going to be there and stuff like that,
Yeah.
kind of thing. Is it's an interesting thing. One thing I was thinking about too, like I do think like the GM giving enough info and setting the stage for that and letting them have enough agency in it is super important. But there's also, I want to even turn of like, okay, if you're like a player who's the people who have been playing, that we do have a little bit of, I think the story and working through it's important, but even that like suspension of disbelief thing of like, okay, we have a new player at the table. Let's not like just ignore them while we do
Yeah.
our own things for 3 hours before we like actually engage them and let them into the story. Like there is like
Yeah.
a player agency thing. And I do think us as GMs, we should be creating that avenue. Like it shouldn't get to that. But I've been in some situations too where like it's like everybody else just doesn't have in their brain, oh, let's include this person and get them into the mix. And then we're just like sitting there, and I think, from a player practice part, like that's the thing too that's important is like, hey, let's bring people into the story so we're all a part of this too, I think is a second aspect.
And if you want to get like really involved with these pre-meetings, what you can do is as they tell you who their character is, you can think, okay, which of my characters may have a tie with somebody like that because of their character and their past. Okay, I want tomorrow you and me and Josh to get together, and I want to talk about how you guys might have heard of or know each other.
Yeah, right.
Then when they come in the game, it seems like there's already this kind of history back there, and it just makes it easier and gets other players involved, like Adam was saying, instead of just the GM trying to tie them in.
Right.
Other players begin to do that. So,
absolutely.
Again, though, that means maybe one extra meeting before you actually bring them into the game, but worth it.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's an important thing to put that time investment into.
Definitely. Cool. Well, thanks for those questions, Evan. Again, if you have sent questions in, anybody sent question in, which we do have several still in the haversack, we're going to get there. So don't fear.
Well, guys, that's our last question for the day. For today, we have more in the haversack, and we'd love you to submit more, get those in, so we can answer them. But join us next time. First, we're very glad Sam could be on today. Sam, it's always great having you on as a guest host. Yeah. Next time, don't forget to join us because we're talking about one of my favorite things, and that is improv.
Ooh.
So be sure to join us for that, and we'll see you all next time on Rise of the GM. Thanks, guys.
See y'all.
See you.